Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, revelations and allegations.
Il reverendo avrebbe molestato almeno...
The Vatican, the media, and the clerical abuse story. Terror attacks in Moscow.
In the heart of the Russian capital.
And relatively little coverage of the story on Russian TV. Saudi Arabia, where fortune-telling on television can mean a death sentence. And the iPad. You can read it, write with it, watch it, browse with it. But will it blend? An American magazine, one that knows a thing or two about the church it is reporting on, calls it the greatest institutional crisis in the history of Christianity. The magazine is the National Catholic Reporter. The institution is the Roman Catholic Church. And the story is of multiple allegations of the sexual abuse of children and accusations that the church at the highest level either tolerated the abuse or covered it up. This is one of the media's who knew what and when did they know it stories. Part of the Vatican's defense strategy has consisted of going on the offense. It said if there is a conspiracy to this story, it's on the part of the media and their consistent attacks on the church. Our starting points this week are varied. Ireland, the United States, and Germany, where the media reported allegations of abuse and what the church's critics call a trail of cover-ups that can be traced all the way to Vatican City.
Started when he was 12 years old.
Il reverendo avrebbe molestato almeno...
Accusations of abuse and questions of cover-ups in print and on the air.
Media has been crucial to the story in Ireland.
It is the extraordinary story of the boys of St. Joseph's, Kilkenny.
Media was crucial to the story in Canada.
Then Leahy was charged with possessing child pornography.
Media was crucial to the story in the United States.
All those years when I lived in silence, I believed that I was the only one.
Wherever it has come out, it has been brought out by media, and the church has had to answer the question.
The sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests is not a new story, not to Pope Benedict. The media were asking him about it before he became Pope. For 25 years as a cardinal, Joseph Ratzinger, as he was then known, led the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican office responsible for disciplining priests.
I wanted to ask you a question about Father Maciel.
In 2002, when asked by an American reporter why his office had failed to deal with an abusive priest in Mexico, Ratzinger reacted with impatience.
This is even, I think, inconvenient in this moment to come to me with this question.
And when pressed, he actually slapped the reporter's hand.
Come to me when this moment is given, not yet.
That kind of background begs the question. If the church's failure to deal with clerical abuse was such a big media story, why would the cardinal at the center of the storm be made head of the church?
I mean, I was there when Pope John Paul II died. And we were all the journalists that were there, that followed the Vatican throughout the years, we were all flabbergasted when Ratzinger's name was called out as the next pope, because we knew, who Ratzinger was. He was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the most secretive institute in the most secretive state, which is the state of the Vatican.
What is driving the story now is the work of three publications, Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper and Der Spiegel magazine, as well as the New York Times. The German story dates back to 1980, when Joseph Ratzinger was an archbishop in Germany. The article said Ratzinger was informed a priest in Essen had sexually abused several boys, but allowed him to be transferred to Munich, where the priest repeated his crimes. The Times story was about an American priest who molested as many as 200 boys. By then, Ratzinger was at the Vatican. The Times story said he failed to take action. The Pope has not responded to the latest accusations, avoiding the issue at his Easter Mass. But L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper, defended him by accusing the media of an anti-Vatican conspiracy.
I find that idea completely silly because the story that's being covered here is so legitimate. And so many times the story has been proven to be true over the years.
Well, you need to remember that the Osservatore Romano is the mouthpiece of the Vatican. It is the newspaper of the Vatican, so it will always defend the Pope and always defend the Catholic Church. What he said was blaming the media. That's what the Church does. And that's kind of an attitude of cover-up that has been there for centuries.
We are very familiar with that particular line of defence in Ireland. The initial response of church leaders is to deny. They say this couldn't possibly be going on or have been going on in the church. So they look to the people, the messenger basically. What is the motivation of the messenger?
Die Deutsche Bischofskonferenz hat eine bundesweite...
Even the church's defenders, some of whom accuse the media of exaggerating the clerical abuse story, allow that the Vatican often brings criticism upon itself through its communications failings.
Most of the allegations about the abuse that happened in the 70s and 80s emerged in the 90s and later years. The problem has been brought under control, but very few people know that. And I think the reason they don't know it is A, because the Church has very badly failed to communicate the fact that it now has robust child protection systems in place, and also the media hasn't been concerned enough to report it. And so we end up with a very misleading impression that there is still a bushfire raging out there when there isn't.
In addition to its print outlets, the Vatican owns its own TV channel, CTV, which it beams to Catholics around the world.
The Pope has met with abuse victims.
CTV was the outlet the Vatican chose to relay Pope Benedict's recent message to Irish Catholics, in which he somehow tried to blame the sins of Catholic priests on the secularization of society. It was a bewildering argument, proof that for the Vatican, getting with the new technology is one thing, getting the message and the strategy right is another.
You need to remember the Vatican, the Catholic Church, is one of the oldest institutions in the world. It's 2,000 years old, and the way it works has never really changed.
Ultimately, one of the primary reasons the Vatican is a city-state that finds itself under a state of siege is that this is a global news story. And the reporting of it offers insights into not only the Church, but also the state and the aggressiveness of media in various countries.
If you look at America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the UK and here, Germany more recently, where it has come out, it has been as a result of digging by media. And by the media just sitting down, as the Boston Globe did, for instance, in 2002, and saying, look, let's address this issue. Let's be proactive about it. Let's dig it out.
One notable exception to that list, the media that has the closest, best access to the Vatican, the media in Italy.
You will think that because most journalists are based in Rome and they are really meters away from St. Peter's Square, they will just rush there to try to look into the story and get more out of it. And instead, they report that the New York Times is reporting it, or the Spiegel is reporting in Germany, but they don't really do much about it. And that's because of Italian media used to be servile to institutions, and especially to the Vatican itself. They try to keep a good relationship with them.
However, at this point, even Italian news organizations are contributing to what has become a critical mass of mass media coverage of a story the Vatican tried and failed to contain.
Here's how our Global Village voices see the story of the media and the Vatican.
The miscalculated response of the Vatican to the child sex abuse scandal should surprise no one. Here in Ireland, the Catholic Church has primarily been concerned with protecting itself and has shown little care for victims.
The Vatican is accurate when the state and media is conspiring against them and trying to crucify them. And when an influential body like the Catholic faith is involved, it is to see how the media can pounce their ignorant, one-sided opinion on the religion and its members.
It seems most news reporting wants us to wait with bated breath on the next communication from the Pope. The parading of victims and their stories on our TV and radios is scandalous. Sometimes the priest-predator story seems to be a news report without end, as we have been hearing about the same problem for many years.
If you've got a beef with the way the media cover the news, our Global Village Voice platform can get your message out. The best way to get in touch with us is through Facebook and Twitter. Go to those sites and look for the Listening Post page. We will let you know what stories we're working on, what technology you need to weigh in with our audience. You can also reach us via email at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Turkey is not the kind of country where news organizations want to run afoul of the authorities unless they have a lot of money or time on their hands. Last year, we reported on the country's largest media baron, Aydin Doğan, and his squabble with the government of Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan. Then came news that Doğan's media group had been charged with tax irregularities and faced a fine of more than $2.5 billion. Earlier this year, Ozan Kilinç, the editor and owner of Turkey's only Kurdish-language newspaper, Azadiya Welat, was sentenced under an anti-terrorism law to 21 years in prison for his reporting on the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party. Now the paper's former editor, Vedat Kurun, has been sentenced to 3 years under the same law for similar offenses, but still faces another 31 charges. The media freedom group Reporters Without Borders has done the math and says that if Kurun is tried on all of those counts and found guilty, he faces up to 525 years in jail. Turkey has applied to join the European Union, but has been told repeatedly that first the country must clean up its human rights record, starting with freedom of the press. Last week, we looked at Google's decision to pull out of China. Now, one of the American companies it left behind there is having problems providing clients with online security. 11 journalists based in China and Taiwan who have email accounts with Yahoo say that their accounts have been hacked into and their settings altered so that all of their correspondence was forwarded to another email address. Yahoo has released a statement saying that while it doesn't usually comment on reported security breaches of its systems, it does take the security issue very seriously. Google had about 30% of the Chinese search engine market before it pulled out. Yahoo has about 5%, and will see Google's decision to relocate to Hong Kong as a growth opportunity. An Israeli reporter is hiding out somewhere in Britain rather than facing legal charges over reports that he wrote about the Israeli military. Yuri Blau works for Haaretz, the left-leaning Israeli newspaper. Blau has written a series of reports critical of the military and has been linked to another journalist named Anat Kam. Kam is already under house arrest in Israel for allegedly photocopying sensitive military documents relating to Israeli killings of Palestinian militants, which may have been ruled illegal by Israeli courts. A Lebanese television presenter who was due to be executed in Saudi Arabia last week for sorcery has, according to his lawyer, been given a temporary reprieve. Ali Sabat did his show from a studio in Beirut, but it had a fairly large following across the Arab world, and he was arrested while on a pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia in 2008. On his broadcast, Sabat, who calls himself a fortune teller, predicts the future of viewers who call in. The practice of fortune telling is considered to be un-Islamic by some and punishable by death. Sabat's lawyer says his client was scheduled to be beheaded but was spared after an appeal by the Lebanese government and Amnesty International. Sabat's case is seen as part of an ongoing power struggle between conservative religious elements in Saudi Arabia and King Abdullah, who is considered to be more of a reformer. We're back after the break with a look at the relative and eerie silence of the Russian media on a very big news story. Welcome back. It was the morning rush hour in Moscow on the 29th of March when bombers hit the city's underground metro system. The two explosions killed 38 people, injured more than 60 others, and were the worst attacks to strike the Russian capital since 2004. But for Muscovites tuning into any one of Russia's 3 major state-controlled TV stations, what they saw on their screens was bizarrely out of sync with the news that was breaking. The slow pickup on the story is a sign of just how fraught the issue of terrorism is for the Kremlin and for the media it controls. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the ever-tightening grip on Russia's broadcast media and the difficulties the media face when reporting the very real threat of terrorism.
Monday morning, the start of the week. In Moscow, commuter traffic was picking up. And then
2 suicide blasts in the Moscow metro system.
At the peak of rush hour in the heart of the Russian capital, it's one of the busiest metros in the world, and it's also one of the deepest.
Police are on high alert across the Russian capital and are investigating whether suicide bombers could be to blame.
The double bombings in the Moscow metro shattered 5 years of relative security that Muscovites had enjoyed. It was big news around the world, but not on TV screens in Russia.
The top 3 Russian television channels didn't cancel their regular morning programming as this tragedy was unfolding.
The first channel briefly broke in to their scheduled programming to say that the attacks had taken place. But according to those people who actually tuned in that morning, hunting for the latest information, on one channel there was a dance show, on the other there was apparently a health food program.
And on the 3rd major federal channel, that's NTV, they didn't run anything at all until 10 a.m.
When asked about the disconnect between the chaos on Moscow's streets and the pictures playing out on TV, each network had its own explanation. A spokesperson for the state-owned Channel 1 said its entertainment shows were not interrupted because they're not humorous programs which are typically cancelled in such events. NTV, owned by the Russian state's gas corporation Gazprom, was the last to report on the bombings. a full 2 hours after they occurred. A representative said the channel reported the story as soon as NTV had video footage from the scene of the tragedy. We spoke to Irina Demchenko, the UK bureau chief for state-owned Russian news agency RIA Novosti. She said the delays in the reporting by the state channels had less to do with official pressure and more to do with the aggressive move towards entertainment programming on TV.
I mean, nobody ordered them not to report about this because obviously everything has happened. So there was no threat of damaging the hostages or these sort of things. This situation actually reflects the condition of the modern Russian main television channels. They're doing less and less news.
But not everyone agrees that this is just a commercial, ratings-driven issue.
I think the real reason is that a year ago, in 2009, the Kremlin had declared that the Chechen separatist problem was over. So news editors were presented with a big problem. Suddenly you had this double bombing. How did this fit into the Kremlin line that the problem had gone away?
The inadequacy of the TV coverage was even more pronounced when compared with what came out in print. Many Russian newspapers have held out against directives to tone down their coverage of sensitive issues like the wars in Chechnya and the unrest in the North Caucasus. On this story, they were true to form.
The newspapers are doing what newspapers, say in Britain or many other countries, would do. They send correspondents down to the scene, ask questions, what happened, who's to blame. All that kind of thing is still possible. You get that in the press, but you wouldn't get it on TV.
And where Russian TV feared to go, the blogs and online news sites went. One of Russia's most influential bloggers, Anton Nosik, posted updates on the coverage, or the lack of it, on Russian state-run television. Other bloggers went online with cell phone footage and eyewitness accounts. Much of this content was posted on the Russian website lifenews.ru.
A number of sites, life.ru for one of them, were the first to show mobile phone footage from within the train stations that were then subsequently picked up by state media and then by foreign media also.
Well, without a doubt, the Russian blogosphere has become the country's most vibrant outlet for political discussion. And in this story, for example, it provided some of the first unfettered images of what was happening. People were calling relatives and immediately blogging. It came in stark contrast to what was being shown on television.
Russian TV journalism hasn't always towed the Kremlin line. The 2002 Moscow theater siege and the school hostage crisis in Beslan in 2004 saw broadcast journalists in Russia provide aggressive, almost no-holds-barred journalism. But that was a different time, and the fallout from the journalism then is being felt now.
Well, frankly, I don't think the news editors really knew how to cover it. Back in 2002, following the Moscow theater siege, the NTV channel was seriously criticized for their no-holds-barred approach to the reporting of that siege. I think editors were hesitant as to how they should cover an event, not knowing fully whether or not they would be in compliance with the law.
Many of the changes in Russian journalism today date back to what's called the Putin era. 10 years ago, Vladimir Putin came to power as president of Russia. It's the legacy of his administration and his continued presence in Russian government as prime minister now that has TV news editors second-guessing themselves.
One of the first things that Putin did was to, as he would put it, create order in the TV and radio. He nationalized or put under control of friendly companies all the TV stations gradually, which meant that the point of the TV was really to reassure the public that someone was in charge, someone was in control. There wasn't this great chaos of the 1990s.
Well, what the Kremlin has understood very well is that television is by far the most powerful media in this country. So what has developed is kind of a self-censor among the journalists, and basically it's understood who is allowed to be shown on television and what kind of criticism is allowed to be leveled at the government and what kind of criticism is forbidden from being shown on national airwaves.
The video of the metro bombings fell into a different category. It wasn't criticism, but it was politically contentious and a little too hot to handle for Russian news broadcasters who've made a habit of singing the Kremlin's tune.
More Global Village Voices now on the news media in Russia.
Well, the newspaper coverage is more open. The TV coverage was solidly controlled. And it refers back to what Putin's old ally Slobodan Milosevic said. He was once asked why he allowed a free press. He said, "I control the television, and Serbs don't read newspapers."
A terrorist attack is designed to cause chaos and bloodshed. And that chaos, not only in the emergency services, on infrastructure, but also on information.
Finally, back in 2007, we featured one of the first successful viral marketing campaigns, Will It Blend? The campaign was a way to promote a brand of kitchen blender, and the idea was simple. Everybody knows blenders can deal with food, but what about light bulbs, or action figures, or hockey pucks? Will they blend? The company tries to blend those things, throws the videos online. Curious consumers keep clicking, so the campaign's a success. Well, the 95th blending experiment has now been posted online. It featured a much-hyped technological product that blended just fine. Any Appleheads out there with queasy stomachs can either look away from the screen now or turn off your televisions for our Internet Video of the Week. And we'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
I love my new iPad. It does a ton of cool things. But will it blend? That is the question. Doesn't quite fit in the jar, but I can take care of that.
No!
I knew I could get the iPad in a BlendTech Total Blender. I think I'll press the iBlend button. Woo. Oh, pad smoke. Don't breathe this. Ah, that was one tough pad.